Welcome back. Professor Mapunye, I wonder if I can ask you this. I want to pick up this point about the question of what it does to our society. Because in a previous discussion in which you and I were both part, one of the suggestions that came up with regard to this issue was that if we went for a system outside of proportional representation, constituency basis, it may in fact exacerbate ethnic divisions. And I'd just like your comment on that.
I'm struggling to hear you, Dennis, but you're talking about the ethnic
divisions that maybe occurs if you move to this kind of system.
Yeah, well, I know that the constituency system, as well as the proportional representation system, both systems are not perfect. And as election, students as well as scholars working in this area, we are aware that both systems have weaknesses and both advantages as well. But I am not so sure whether one system would accentuate the ethnic factor. Some people have said that the ethnic factor might be accentuated by one system. I'm not so sure whether this is what you're talking about.
Yes, I am.
But my personal view. Yeah, but my personal view is that I don't think there's that risk because it's actually a question of looking at what we are trying to reform. Up to now, listening to the discussion, I perceive that there's this issue around accountability that keeps coming up, that the main aim of talking about electoral reform currently apparently is about ensuring accountability.
All right.
But I'm not so sure, let alone the ethnic factor, whether this will enhance accountability. Because if you have an MP, for instance, who is sleeping in Parliament, who's obviously going to be less accountable, to what extent can the electoral reform make that?
Well, the
MP
proposition
wake
is,
up
I'm sorry, the proposition is, if the MP is sleeping in Parliament, then the constituents who would then know his or her name, because they come from, because that MP's got to go back to them, not going to get in next time round. And there would be much greater accountability than if they were simply accountable to one particular party boss who may be perfectly happy to have them there for all sorts of expedient reasons, which cuts out the voters from the loop. That's the proposition.
But the point is acknowledged, but there's also the flip side. Even though that MP might be known in the constituency, that doesn't guarantee that that MP will be more accountable. What the problem I have with the current argument that we need to bring in elements of constituency systems to ensure that MPs are more accountable is that there are other ways of making sure that that MP can be more accountable.
Such as?
For instance, through the party. Such as through the party, for instance, the party, and also through Parliament, to ensure that there's more discipline, and there's also the question of the role of the whippery, to make sure that these MPs are more accountable.
All right,
but
okay.
Electoral reform per se is not going to resolve
Okay,
that.
well, let me just ask, there are two issues on the table. Let me just ask you, the ethnic issue I'm putting on the table because I've heard this before, in fact, in that same seminar, I think, where you were also part, Professor, the issue was raised that if we went for this, we could well exacerbate ethnic divisions in our society.
Not within society. I think it's just mostly within the ANC. Look,
why just within the ANC?
Because I think in Indian and white communities, opposition parties would do very well. So it's Indian, some colored, and many white officials within the ANC would worry that there's no place I can win an election.
Well, that certainly is a problem.
Well, they just would be. Probably people from those communities that belong to opposition parties would be winning. So it's not that they would change the ethnic balance, it would just change the partisan balance. So you have a lot of people saying, well, I currently have power inside the party because I'm appointed and I've got a role as an intellectual or as an expert on this or that, and I want to make sure that the party is still going to keep me coming in. And so you'll get strong resistance from those groups of people who see threats to their own positions in Parliament and their salaries, quite frankly.
If we went for this system, therefore, your argument is actually ethnic divisions would not. This is a pretty neutral factor.
Yes,
is that
I think
what you're
so.
saying?
Because you're not going to be able to, with just 300 distriicts or even 400 districts across the country, you're not going to be able to draw them so small that it's going to look like old.
Okay, so it'd still be straddling divisions.
Yes,
okay.
There will be very large constituencies.
Let me then come to this question of accountability, if I may.
Yes.
Right, because obviously you're going to support his argument on ethnicity, so there's no point that I go there. I mean, in the old days, I almost said the good, I mean the bad old days, right? When I was a child, I used to have to be taken on social studies visits to Parliament, and they were all constituency MPs, and half of them were sleeping or doing nothing.
Yes, that is true. But they knew that they had to go back and get re-elected.
Yeah, they were going to be re-elected. I mean, it used to be
had
said
to
that you could get an
report back.
ox and be elected by the National Party in a
well,
particular thing, and I mean that literally.
That is true, but in effect in South Africa, one day they did change their minds, and they did. Those people
And
who
you
used
crawled up to a few more seats. That's what happened.
well, the fact of the matter is that people changed their minds, and what we need to be able to do for South African voters is to allow them the choice of saying, I want that MP, but not that one that snoozes in Parliament. Now, if the MPs choose to vote for somebody who snoozes in Parliament, then that's their good right.
But how much is, I mean, what I'm concerned about, and perhaps this is what Professor was suggesting, and that's why I want to probe you on it as we close, is we've got a problem, clearly, in Parliament. There is, I know Professor Mattis said that people don't know their MPs, and fair enough, that certainly supports your argument. But there's the studies I've read show, not to suggest that the other institutions of government are so wonderful, but that there's a serious gap here between what people's expectations are and what you politicians in Parliament are delivering.
Yes.
Why would this suddenly just miraculously change
I don't think
the
it would be sudden, and it would not be miraculous. But what it would do is, over time, it would empower ordinary citizens, once they realized they had the power in their hands, to get rid of people who were useless and to put into Parliament people that were really good. That would be good for Parliament. It would increase the relevance of the debate. It would increase the credibility of Parliament, and it would be good for democracy in South Africa.
All right. Unfortunately, I can't take this any further, as much as I'd love to, because it's really an important issue. It goes to the heart of the question of democracy. What do we mean by representative democracy? What do we mean that this is government for the people, by the people? Meaning, to what extent do we have a situation where our present electoral system, doesn't matter which political party you support, actually is one where when representatives go to Parliament, they are accountable to the electorate in a manner which is the best optimum situation that we can have. The suggestion is that our present system, born of a particular settlement in 1994, may well not be perfect. And you've heard a series of quite compelling arguments the other way around. Whether they're right or not, you judge for yourself. Goodbye.
News that moves. ENCA.com.